Hi, everyone. Welcome to Between Two Speakers, where we talk to speakers and each other about speaking and communication related topics. I'm Marianna Swallow. I'm a professional presentation skills workshop leader, and I am also a professor of business communications at Loyola University in Chicago. You can find me at mariannaswallow.com.
And I'm Randy Ford. I'm a writer and storytelling strategist. You can find me at firststorystrategies.com. You have been doing adult learning and training and workshops for a really long time, and I'm always fascinated to hear about it. But I want to know this, like, what can those of us who may be speaking in front of an audience, but it's not an instruction type thing, what can we learn from what you've learned about adult learners that we can build into our presentations, even if they're not instructional, just the way that
Absolutely.
adults take in information?
Sure. Well, I think the biggest overall, kind of most broad thing, but it's so important, is to mix it up. And the reason for that is that we all have different communication styles and we all have different learning styles. And I think we may have talked about this on a prior Between Two Speakers. Some of us are visual learners. We need other things to look at. We talked about this in our visuals talk. But some people like to just sit and listen. They're auditory learners. And then others, I don't have my fidget with me. I actually have a rubber balloon dog that I keep when I teach. But tactile learners or kinesthetic learners need to either take notes, they need to be touching something, doing something. If you ever see someone who's real fidgety when they're just having to sit and listen, it's because they need to do something in order to take in and process the information. So I always tell clients and students, it should be something other than just you standing there and talking. Can you ask a question to your audience? Can you bring out a prop? Can you show a video? Can you play music during the breaks? Can you stop and ask your audience to give you answers on something? You know, to your point, Randy, even if you're not instructing on something, let's say you're hired to give a speech at a conference, you might do something like throw out a rhetorical question and just ask people to throw out answers. You know, Esther Perel does this. I got to see her a few years ago at the Chicago Humanities Fest, and she wanted to know what was on the minds of the audience. And she had a pen and paper and said, hey, I want to get your questions, but I also want to see what themes are going on, so just shout them out. And it was kind of really cool because we weren't just sitting and listening to a lecture. So that's probably the biggest thing, is that we all have different communication styles, which means we take in information differently, but we all have different learning styles, which means we choose to learn and process information differently. So it's real important for the speaker to mix it up as much as they can.
That makes sense. And to that rolls into my third question, and then I'll stop. You can get you out of the hot seat. But so we're here in 2021. We're talking on Zoom. There's been a lot written and a lot talked about
Mhm.
the way 2020 and now into 2021 have changed online meetings, online instruction. But you've been doing remote learning like since way before the pandemic,
Yeah.
since probably several pandemics ago.
Not that, I'm not that old, but
Okay.
let's say early
So
2000s.
okay. What's different now, aside from the things that we've learned over the past year or so,
Mhm.
um, to those old days of remote learning?
Sure. So I remember the days when I would have to do a training entirely over the phone, where I'd be dialing in from at home. I would usually have a computer screen in front of me just so I could describe what I was looking at, and then a room of people I never met were on the other end, either on one of those, spaceship looking speaker phones around a desk, or sometimes it might just be one person learning a course from me while he was looking at the same thing on his computer. So in the early days, it was like almost 100% verbal. If there was any visual or any handouts, you'd have to email them to the client ahead of time, and then you'd have to make sure you have the same thing. And it was all we had, so it's what we had to work with. But one thing that happened as a result of that kind of training was I got really good at making sure I could describe everything clearly, but also give directions clearly, whether it was, in the upper left-hand corner of your document or lower right-hand corner, or do you see the star that's centered at the bottom of the page? So it was very verbal, and I had to rely on verbal and conveying a description if I needed to. So definitely less visuals. But then as you asked me about this a while ago, and then I said, well, as it got into like 2005, 2010, we had what I call glorified conference calls, where you might all have some kind of portal where you could all look at the same slides, but there were no cameras. So it would just be my voice or just the voice of the participants when they chose to chime in. And I remember one job I had where I was teaching in any training over 100 people in each session. They were scattered across the country. I also had to check for their learning. So I had to create verbal quizzes, and I also had to create open-ended questions that a minimum of 10 people had to answer. And same thing, we would have the portal where they could see my slides and I could see what slide I was on. Something else that was different was, even though I had the slides, I was running them and they could see them on their end, there were often a lot of delays. I remember where I would have to say, okay, I'm on slide 5 now, and we're talking about the such and such, and the title says XYZ. Does everyone see that? And I'd have to, no, no, no. Okay, somebody tell me when it comes up on your screen. So it was, it was almost like we were back in the days of dial-up, where you're waiting for the hamster to turn things fast enough so that it gets to the other end or whatever. So it was very, a step up from the verbal conference call only, but still very limited visuals. They couldn't see me, I couldn't see them. And you lost things like the body language, the facial expressions. The other thing I had to tell them when I would say, do you understand this concept? Guys, I can't hear you nodding, I don't know if you're a Ted Lasso fan, but that's something he tells his team when he's trying to pump them up and they just go like this. He says, I can't hear your nod. So it was very verbal. There were definite limitations that didn't make training ideal, and probably not for the learners, probably didn't make learning ideal either. So we also didn't have the interactivity that we have now with Zoom or some of these portals that allow you to create quizzes, polls, type in the chat, talk back to each other like we are now. So to create interactive exercises and to check for learning, there was a lot more heavy lifting I had to do on my end to make sure that my message was clear. So if anything, in some ways it made me a better trainer, but let's just say I really love Zoom. For all its foibles, I'm glad we have what we have now.
Yeah. Awesome. Those were the burning questions that I had for you this time. I will always have questions for you, and luckily people write in with questions, which is fun. So there will be more to ask you down the road, I'm sure.
Great. I enjoyed this. Thanks so much, Randy.
Yeah. Thank you everybody for joining us for Between Two Speakers. I'm Randy Ford.
I'm Marianna Swallow. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.